Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. Most preppers are pretty good at doing things like stockpiling food and water, but one aspect of preparedness that a lot of us overlook is being able to maintain what we have or make repairs in the aftermath of a disaster. And when it comes to that, having the right tools is very important. A couple years ago, I did a video showing the power tools every prepper should have, but as I'm sure most of y'all would agree, those do have some pretty big drawbacks, especially when it comes to preparing for a longer term situation. So in this video, I'm going to cover a wide range of hand tools, starting with basic essentials and then going further in depth for specific categories of tools. The first thing everyone should have is a screwdriver set, and traditional fixed blade or single bit screwdrivers are where most people start. They're good since they're lightweight, and then they're skinny enough to fit almost anywhere. You can get them in different lengths to reach screws that are either recessed or deep inside something, like an engine compartment. These aren't all of the fixed blade screwdrivers that I own, but at a minimum, I recommend getting a set that has flathead and then also Phillips bits of different sizes and lengths. You could also branch out and get some Torx drivers as well, but having those flathead and Phillips drivers allow you to do pretty much anything around the house that you may need to do. It's also a good idea to have a dedicated beater flathead that you can use for light prying or other more abusive tasks. You could get a dedicated demo screwdriver, but an older one like this will work as well. Then after that, everyone should have a claw hammer. A common 16-ounce claw hammer like this one will work for most jobs. You'll be able to hang pictures, make repairs on wood fences, and it'll be sufficient for occasional larger building projects like building deer stands or chicken coops. Estwing makes good, fairly affordable hammers. They're the same folks that make the hatchets and camp axes a lot of preppers like to use. Mine, though, is just made by Stanley. It was part of a toolkit that my wife and I got as a wedding gift, and it's held up pretty well. Next tool everyone should have is an adjustable wrench, preferably two. These will help you deal with nuts and bolts on cars, generators, and even plumbing fixtures around your house. And the reason you want two is that sometimes you'll need to hold both a nut and bolt at the same time to loosen or tighten them. If you don't have two, then one could spin while you're trying to tighten the other one, and you'll get absolutely nowhere. As far as size goes, I find myself using this 10-inch one the most, but a 12-inch model like this is useful as well. This is one tool, though, that I prefer older vintage versions of. Crescent is probably the most well-known manufacturer of those. That's why they're called Crescent wrenches, but anything that says made in the USA on it and it still moves is probably a good bet. And even though this isn't a hand tool, another thing everyone should have is a way to protect their personal information. I've been using Delete Me for several months to help keep my online information secure, and I'd like to thank them for sponsoring us today. While modern technology has made life more convenient, it's also made protecting your privacy and your OPSEC a lot harder. Information like where we live, who we're married to, how many kids we have, and where we work are all available to anyone who can do a simple online search. Data brokers store this and even more sensitive information and will sell it to anyone who has a pulse and a credit card. Criminals and stalkers can use anything that they find to harass you, steal your identity, and make your life miserable. They could even use your online information to scam your loved ones. Someone tried to do that to my grandmother a while back using information that they found about one of my cousins. But you do have the right and the ability to protect your information, and Delete Me will reach out to the different data broker websites and request to have your information removed. They've removed my information from several websites, most of which I didn't even know existed. I think it's a really good service for preppers to use, and if you want to check them out, then you can use this link and code to get 20% off. After that, I also recommend having a good set of slip joint pliers, specifically Vam pliers. While all slip joint pliers are good for grabbing things and holding on to nuts and bolts, these have special serrations that are designed to grip onto screw heads if they've been stripped out. They bite in so well that you can just turn the screw out by hand. You may even be able to use these on screws that have had their heads totally ripped off. Needle nose pliers are another thing that everyone should have. They can reach and grab onto stuff from places other tools can't, and they also work well for bending wires. Then tongue and groove pliers, more commonly known as channel locks, are another good thing to have around. They're good for larger fasteners and work really well for plumbing tasks like loosening and tightening coupling nuts under your sink. Since they can open so wide, they'll also allow you to open up cleanouts outside of your home. Then most people will also want some type of locking pliers, also commonly known as vice grips. Some people consider these to be universal fastener removers, but that's not really the best use for them because you're going to mangle the mess out of whatever it is that you're trying to clamp onto. But they do work well for rounded nuts that a wrench will just slip off of. Then there's also a few measuring tools that everyone should have. The first one being just a standard 25-foot tape measure. A 25-footer will be able to handle most things around the house. And one of my favorites here is the Stanley Power Lock. It has a good standout, meaning you can extend the tape out quite a ways before it breaks and snaps, and they're also reliable. I bought a tape measure by Milwaukee a couple years ago that didn't really last all that long before it started having trouble retracting. This was cheaper and it works better. Then a torpedo level's good to have. It won't be as accurate as a longer level will be, but they're nice since you can just stick them in your pocket and quickly check your level whenever you need to. Then a speed square will help you make straight and square cut lines on things like 2x4s. Another thing people should have is a good collection of saws, and basic hand saws like this one are what most people will picture when they think of that. These are mainly used for cutting dimensional lumber like 2x4s to the proper length, but they can also cut tree branches if necessary. Folding saws are also useful, but they're more well suited for keeping in places like your bug out bag or other survival kits so that you can process firewood or get materials for building shelters. Hacksaws work well for cutting metal or plastic. Just be sure to have plenty of spare blades set aside that are the correct length for your hacksaw frame. You may also want to have a compact hacksaw for reaching into tight spaces. A moment ago I talked about screwdrivers, but there's a lot more options out there than the traditional single bit versions I showed, and I actually tend to use bit drivers like this most of the time. They're nice since they'll allow you to work with a lot of different kinds of fasteners, and they also use standard 1/4-inch hex bits. And so you'll be able to use them with bits from pretty much anywhere. That'll allow you to replace broken ones and add new sizes or types of bits as needed. The only downside to bit drivers is that they are heavier and they're sometimes bulkier than fixed screwdrivers. Some, like this one here, have a larger end, and that could prevent it from reaching down into certain areas. You can also take this a step further and get a precision screwdriver set like this one. Now, most folks won't use tiny bits like these too often. They're mainly used in electronics, but you may need them occasionally for things like folding knives and electronic optics. These are made by Klein, and I really like Klein screwdrivers in general. They're well made and their handles are more comfortable than anything else I've used. You could also get a ratcheting screwdriver. This one is also made by Klein, and it comes with several different kinds of bits that are stored inside of the handle. The only thing that I don't like about it is that it doesn't use normal 1/4-inch hex bits. These are longer, double-sided bits, and if you try to use just standard little short bits in this, it's not going to work. Insulated screwdrivers are useful if you need to do any sort of electrical work, and this one's double-sided. It has a flat head bit on one side and then a number 2 Phillips on the other, and it can also accept other bits from that same series. Then I also like to have some good Allen wrench sets. Nicer ones like these by Wiha are a lot better than the junky wrenches that come included with different things. They're made of better materials, and they're also more precise, so they're less likely to strip out screw heads. And even though you don't come across them too often, if you have something like an electronic optic that has very tiny Allen head screws, you're going to need small sets like these to help you deal with them. And sort of related to screwdrivers, another kind of tool you may want to have is manual drills. These come in a few different types and sizes. First, I have a hand brace. These use special auger bits to drill large, long holes in wood. Here's a couple of different sizes of those. And you can also get adapters for them that allow you to use modern 1/4 inch hex bits. Having that's useful if you need to drive longer screws like deck screws. Then another common type of manual drill is a hand drill, also known as an egg beater. These are more similar to power drills that we use today in that they use the same type of chuck. But a big downside to them is that the chucks on these can only be hand tightened. They're not like modern drills that have ratcheting or key chucks. So because of this, round drill bits tend to slip in them. So if you have one, you may want to invest in a drill bit set that has hex shank bits like these designed for impact drivers. Also keep in mind that hand drills aren't ideal for drilling larger holes. Unless you're built like a tank, they tend to get jammed up. Larger ones like this, though, are nice since they have ratcheting mechanisms that allow you to use them in tight spaces. Yankee screwdrivers are sort of a combination drill and ratcheting screwdriver. It rotates as you press it down, allowing you to drill or drive screws, and then it can also be turned like a regular screwdriver. Older ones like this use proprietary bits that are getting harder to find, but you can find adapters like what I have over here that allow you to use modern, like 1/4 inch hex style bits. Then you may want to have a couple of other hammers besides the 16-ounce claw hammer I mentioned earlier. First, if you're going to be doing larger building projects frequently, having a larger framing hammer would be very useful. These tend to be heavier and have longer handles than most common claw hammers do. Now, you may have noticed that my framing hammer is a 17-ounce, which obviously isn't a lot heavier than my other one, but its longer length will allow me to have more power on my swing, and it has a larger striking face as well, making it better for driving lots of longer nails at one time. Framing hammers also have rip claws, which are better for demo work like tearing out drywall or separating boards. Then after that, it's also a good idea to have a rubber mallet. These allow you to hit things without tearing them up or denting them. And even though I mentioned a few kinds of wrenches and pliers, there are others that you may want to have as well. If you plan on working on generators, cars, or other kinds of mechanical equipment, you're definitely going to want some combination wrenches along with a good socket and ratchet set. While adjustable wrenches are useful, they tend to strip bolt heads, and combo wrenches and sockets fit fasteners much better, so they're less likely to do that. Sockets are available in a few different drive sizes: 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, and 1/2 inch. There are larger ones, but once you get into 3/4 inch drive sockets and larger, you're probably working on larger equipment like tractors, and if that's the case, it's very likely that you already have what you need. 3/8 inch socket sets are good for general purpose use since they're the happy median. My tool set, though, is a little different since I inherited a lot of tools from folks like my great-grandfather who were mechanics, or at the very least worked on their own stuff. I got a lot of 1/2 inch drive sockets and ratchets from them, and then I tend to use this 1/4 inch drive set for smaller stuff around the house. Now when it comes to sockets, you have a few different types. 6-pointers are the strongest, while 12-point sockets are easier to get onto a fastener since they have more points. These little Craftsman sockets are universal sockets. They can fit 6-point, 12-point, 4-point, external Torx, and spline fasteners. Sockets and ratchets are nice since they make removing nuts and bolts faster and easier, but they don't always fit into certain areas. So because of this, you should also have a good set of combination wrenches. Like sockets, they're designed to fit fasteners of a specific size, and a lot of my combination wrenches were inherited as well. They're old, made in the USA Craftsman stuff, and they've held up very well. I guess though, if you can only have one, you should probably get a wrench set first since those can reach more places, but it's good to have both sockets and combination wrenches if you can. It'll make your work faster, and if you have both, you'll be able to use one to hold a bolt and the other end to turn the nut on the other end. Then when it comes to pliers, if you're going to do any electrical work, you're going to need a good set of wire strippers. These can cut wire to the proper length and remove the insulation from the end without cutting into the wire itself. Klein and Knipex are considered to be the best when it comes to electrician's hand tools. Mine, though, was made by Milwaukee, and it works well too. Then you may also want to have a good set of lineman's pliers. These work well for cutting thicker or harder wires than what wire strippers can handle, and they can even cut barbed wire as well. For larger cutting tasks, bolt cutters are also good to have. Then for plumbing, pipe wrenches, also known as monkey wrenches, are very useful. They'll allow you to grip onto round objects, like pipes, imagine that don't have flat parts to grab onto. Then other miscellaneous tools are good to have as well. You'll need pry bars to separate boards and for demo work, rasps and chisels for woodworking, and then also if you need to measure over a larger area, then a 100-foot tape measure is very, very useful for that. And of course, these aren't the only hand tools that you'd want to have. I may do a follow-up video in the future if this one gets a good response. Now, if you want to see the power tools that every prepper should have, then click here. Or if you want to see the preps that you need to survive the first month after a disaster, then click here. Once again, I'd like to thank Delete Me for sponsoring us today. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.